Nara steadied herself, her heart beating as she stared at the crowd. Every eye seemed fixed on her, most of them waiting for her to fail again. She could feel their anticipation like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. Swallowing hard, she forced herself to look away, her gaze settling on Stephanie, who stood off to the side with an encouraging smile. Somehow, that simple gesture calmed her, reminding her that not everyone was against her. Vanessa's loud voice echoed in Nara's mind as she breathed in and out, trying to regain her composure. "Again!" Vanessa had shouted, her tone biting, sharp, as if disappointment was already lurking beneath her words. Nara knew this was her moment. She couldn't afford to be weak now, not after everything she had already endured. She had to impress Vanessa. It was now or never. With a deep breath, she brought her right foot forward and took her first step. Then, her second. Each movement felt heavy, labored, as if the weight of the entire room had attached itself to her ankles. Her eyes darted nervously to Vanessa, hoping for some sign of approval, but Vanessa's face was as emotionless as ever, her cold, unblinking stare giving away nothing. A wave of doubt crashed over Nara. Was she failing again? Was she not good enough? As her mind raced with self-doubt, her right foot suddenly tangled with her left. In an instant, she lost her balance, and before she could catch herself, she fell hard to the floor again. A collective murmur spread through the crowd. Nara could hear the faint sounds of boos and whispers, and her heart sank. Her chest tightened, her pulse quickened, and shame washed over her in waves. She had failed again. From her spot on the floor, she dared to glance up. Vanessa's eyes were locked onto hers, unflinching, almost bored. "Again!" Vanessa shouted, but this time her voice was laced with furnished seriousness. Nara swallowed hard, her face burning with embarrassment. Her body ached, but the pain in her ankle was sharper than the others. As she tried to get up, she winced. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through her right ankle, and she cried out, "Ouch!" she gasped, clutching her ankle. Vanessa's demeanor shifted slightly, her sternness melting into something resembling concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping closer. Nara bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill over. "My ankle. I think I sprained it," she said, her voice trembling. Vanessa sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair as she turned to the crowd. "Who among you is willing to help Nara inside?" she asked, scanning the faces of the other models seated down in silence. The crowd stood still, exchanging glances, but no one made a move. Nara's heart sank even further. She could hardly believe that no one cared enough to help. She felt utterly humiliated, left to fend for herself while everyone else watched. Just as she was about to resign herself to struggling alone, a voice broke through the silence. "I will," Stephanie said, standing up quickly and walking toward the podium. Relief washed over her as Stephanie reached her. Gently, Stephanie knelt down and unbuckled Nara's shoes. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said softly, offering a reassuring smile. Nara nodded, grateful beyond words as Stephanie helped her to her feet. Together, they made their way slowly off the podium. Nara leaned heavily on Stephanie as they walked back to her seat, her limp pronounced but bearable with her friend's assistance. The murmurs from the crowd faded into the background, but the sting of their earlier judgment still lingered. She felt like a failure, a laughingstock, and her sprained ankle was just the physical manifestation of the emotional pain she carried. Vanessa stood in the center of the room, addressing the crowd once more. "I've watched most of you walk today, and I must say some of you have really impressed me." Her eyes scanned the room, pausing on Yvonne, who was beaming with pride. "Yvonne, you did a great job today." Yvonne's smile stretched even wider as she accepted the praise. Vanessa continued, her tone stern but not unkind. "That does not mean the rest of you didn't do well, but many of you need to put in more effort." Nara's head dropped in shame. She knew that criticism was aimed at her. "We've come to the end of today's lesson," Vanessa announced, her voice carrying over the quiet room. "Go home and practice. We'll be doing this again next time." With that, she turned and left the room. Nara sank into her chair, the pain in her ankle throbbing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She was still in shock from her fall, and the humiliation was almost too much to bear. Stephanie knelt beside her, concern etched across her face. "Does it hurt that bad?" she asked, gently reaching for Nara's ankle. Nara winced as Stephanie's fingers brushed against the tender spot. "Ouch!" she cried, pulling her foot back. "Oh my God, this is serious!" Stephanie exclaimed, her eyes wide with worry. "You need to go to the hospital." Nara shook her head, trying to put on a brave face. "I'll be fine. I just need to get home and rest." She gingerly touched her ankle, flinching slightly as the pain shot through her again. Before Stephanie could respond, the shadow of someone standing in front of them caught Nara's attention. She looked up, and there stood Yvonne, surrounded by her group of friends. Nara sighed in irritation, already knowing what was coming next. Nara knew exactly why Yvonne and her friends had come over. They were there to rub salt on her wounds, to mock her when she was already down. "Who would believe that Dynasty's biggest Singni can't even walk in high heels?" Yvonne sneered, and her friends erupted into laughter. Nara felt a wave of irritation rise within her. She just wanted Yvonne to say what she needed to and leave. "What do you want, Yvonne?" Nara asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though the frustration was clear. Yvonne smirked and stepped closer. "I just wanted to see how much of a failure you are. Gosh, Nara, I expected more from you, but as always you disappoint." Her taunt hit its mark, and her group of friends laughed even louder. Stephanie, who had been standing silently by Nara's side, finally spoke up. "Please, can you all just leave? Can't you see she's in pain?" Her voice trembled slightly, but the frustration was clear. Yvonne turned her icy gaze towards Stephanie, giving her a condescending smile. "Ah, the hero of the day," she mocked. "The only one bold enough to help this embarrassment back to her seat." She said, pointing at Nara, "Tell me, don't you have any sense of fear?" "No fear at all?" Stephanie swallowed hard. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. Yvonne's smile faded as her eyes darkened. "You're already on thin ice for speaking back to me earlier. And now you had the nerve to help this failure get back on her feet? Are you out of your mind?" Her tone was sharp, dripping with malice. Stephanie's confidence faltered, and she looked down, unable to respond. Nara, though still in pain, couldn't stand Yvonne's attitude any longer. "Yvonne, you can't talk to my friend like that. Who do you think you are?" she shouted, anger fueling her words. Yvonne smiled again, turning to her friends who had been standing behind her the whole time. They laughed at Nara's outburst, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "You know, girls," Yvonne said, her smirk growing wider, "I'm starting to wonder, don't you think Nara only got into this agency because her husband pulled some strings?" Her words dripped with venom, and her eyes sparkled with cruel delight. "That's not true!" Nara cried, pushing herself to her feet, her sprained ankle forgotten in the heat of the moment. Yvonne just smiled, looking at Nara like she was some weak, pathetic creature. "Who's going to hold you up now, huh?" she mocked. "What are you talking about?" Nara asked, confused by Yvonne's cryptic words. Yvonne stepped even closer, grabbing a handful of Nara's hair and pulling her down slightly. "You don't seem to understand the position I hold here, do you?" she hissed into her ear. "Let me make this clear. You better leave this agency soon, or I'll make sure there's a scandal that will ruin you." Nara's heart raced, but she clenched her fists, refusing to let Yvonne see her fear. "You're not as powerful as you think, Yvonne." Yvonne just laughed softly. "We'll see about that." With one last condescending glance at Nara and Stephanie, she turned on her heel and walked away, her entourage trailing after her. As soon as they were gone, Nara collapsed back into her chair, her body trembling from both the pain in her ankle and the tension of the confrontation. Stephanie knelt beside her, worry written all over her face. "Are you okay?" Stephanie asked gently. Nara nodded, though her eyes were filled with tears. "I'm fine. Let's just get out of here." Stephanie helped her up, and together they slowly made their way out of the room, leaving the laughter and taunts of Yvonne's group behind them. As Nara and Stephanie made their way out of the rehearsal room, Nara's anger was still simmering beneath the surface. When she caught sight of a familiar figure outside, it flared up again. It was Elena, her manager. The moment Elena saw Nara limping, her expression shifted to one of concern. She hurried over to meet her. "Nara, what's wrong? Why are you limping?" Elena asked, reaching out to hold Nara's arm. Nara immediately pulled her hand away, her eyes hard. "Don't touch me," she snapped. Stephanie, sensing the tension, looked at Elena with confusion. "Who is this, Nara?" she asked, unsure why the woman was addressing Nara so formally, as if they had some deeper connection. Without looking at Elena, Nara replied coldly, "She's my manager." Elena's face fell at the words. Despite the fact that she was her manager, she was still her best friend. She thought so. Hearing Nara reduce her to just that title stung, but she pushed her emotions aside, focusing on the limp that worried her. "Why are you limping?" Elena asked again, her concern growing. Nara's eyes blazed with irritation. "Elena, that's none of your business. Move out of my way!" Elena stood frozen, shocked by Nara's hostility. "Nara, it's me. Why are you talking to me like that?" Nara scoffed. "And so what if it's you? Look, Elena, I'm not in the mood for this. I have a sprained ankle and all I want to do is get home and rest. So please, just get out of my way." She spat, her voice sharp and filled with frustration. Stephanie flinched at Nara's outburst, feeling uncomfortable. She knew Elena meant more to Nara than just a manager, but the anger radiating from Nara left no room for argument. "Let's go," Nara said firmly to Stephanie, ignoring Elena's hurt expression. Without waiting for a response, Nara shoved past Elena, still limping, making her way to the entrance. Elena stood there stunned, as she tried to process what had just happened. She couldn't believe that Nara had reacted in such a manner. She had thought that by now she must have forgiven her. She was still surprised to find out that she was still annoyed. As Nara pushed open the entrance door, Stephanie glanced back at Elena, feeling a pang of guilt. But Nara didn't stop, and Stephanie followed, unsure of what had triggered such bitterness between them. Elena, left alone, watched as Nara walked away. Her heart sank as she realized that something had shifted between them and she needed to fix it, else all the plans she had carefully arranged would all fall and crumble, which she did not want. As Stephanie led Nara outside Dynasty Agency, her mind was still reeling from the intense exchange between Nara and Elena. The weight of the confrontation was too much for her to ignore. She knew she needed to ask Nara the question that had been gnawing at her vet since she witnessed her altercation with Elena. "Nara, do you mind if I ask you something?" Stephanie finally said, her voice hesitant but curious. Nara, whose thoughts were occupied with everything Yvonne had told her and the confrontation with Elena, turned to face Stephanie. Her expression was one of pain, not just emotional but also physical, as her ankle throbbed from the sprained ankle. "What question?" Nara replied, her tone tinged with weariness. Stephanie bit her lip, unsure if she should pry, but her curiosity was too strong. "Your manager, it seems like you know her very well." Nara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Oh, Elena, she's my best friend," she said calmly after a brief moment of contemplation. She had considered telling Stephanie about the strain in her relationship with Elena, but decided against it. Some things were better left unsaid, especially when her emotions were still raw. "Best friend? How did she become your manager? It seemed like you two had a fight earlier," Stephanie probed gently, her brow furrowed in concern. Nara smiled, though it was a tired one. "It's a long story," she said, her voice trailing off, signaling she wasn't ready to share more. Stephanie sighed, understanding the unspoken boundary. She didn't want to push Nara any further. "How's your ankle? Does it still hurt?" she asked, changing the subject. Nara winced slightly, reminded of the sharp pain in her ankle. "It does. Gosh, I feel so embarrassed about how today's rehearsals went," she admitted, her face flushing with frustration. "Oh, don't be," Stephanie said quickly, trying to comfort her. "The shoes were heavy." "But you walked perfectly," Nara said, her eyes widening in disbelief. "How did you manage to do it?" By this time they had reached the outside of the agency, where the sounds of traffic filled the air. The busy streets of the city hummed with activity. "Well, that's because I practiced for a whole year," Stephanie said with a light laugh. "A whole year?" Nara exclaimed, her voice filled with surprise. Stephanie smiled, a bit amused by Nara's reaction. "Why are you so surprised? It took some of the models there 2 years to perfect walking in those heels. So you really don't need to feel bad. How long have you been practicing with such heavy heels?" she asked. Nara grew quiet, her mind drifting back to the training she'd done at her previous agency. She tried to recall the exact timeline. "I started training at my former agency, but I still haven't perfected it. It's been about 6 months now, I think." "Just 6 months?" Stephanie's voice softened, realizing Nara had been too hard on herself. "You see, you don't need to feel bad. Like they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. Nara let out a huge sigh, her shoulders visibly relaxing. Somehow, Stephanie's words had a calming effect on her. For the first time in a while, she felt a glimmer of hope. Ever since the disastrous rehearsal, she had been drowning in self-doubt. But Stephanie's encouragement was like a lifeline. And besides, Stephanie continued, you managed to walk a few steps in those heels today. That's an improvement. Nara smiled softly. Thanks, she whispered, grateful for the support. Stephanie nodded and waved at a man standing beside a sleek white luxury bus parked a few feet away. That must be your manager, Nara said, noticing the man's sharp suit and the confident way he stood. Stephanie smiled warmly. Yes, that's Luke, my manager. She paused for a moment, then, with a gentle smile, offered, since you're not really on speaking terms with Elena right now, why don't you hop on the bus? I can drop you off. For a moment, Nara was tempted to accept the offer, her body aching from the strain of the day. But then, a flash of realization hit her. She had promised to call Gordon as soon as she was finished. With everything that had happened, Yvonne's threats and her meeting with Elena, she had completely forgotten about Gordon, and to worsen the matter, she had even sent Tyler home. Nara was about to answer Stephanie when she noticed Yvonne approaching, accompanied by her manager. The manager was practically buried under an assortment of bags and items, looking ready to trip and fall at any moment. Nara's irritation spiked instantly. What does she want this time? Nara muttered, her voice tinged with exasperation. Who? Stephanie asked, glancing around to see who Nara was talking about. The moment she spotted Yvonne, she let out a deep sigh. Oh, great. Why does your sister always seem to find you at the worst possible times? And I bet she's going to cause a scene now. Just wait and see, Stephanie said, her frustration evident. Yvonne finally reached them. She looked them both up and down, then scanned the area as if searching for something. After a moment, she turned back to Nara, a mocking smile plastered on her face. Why are you still outside? Why haven't you left? She asked, her voice dripping with ridicule. And how is that any of your business, Yvonne? Nara retorted, already weary from the day's events. You know, I didn't come here with you, and I don't expect you to be concerned about when or how I leave. Yvonne let out a light laugh. Why can't I find your bus, and that crazy-looking manager of yours? Nara steadied herself with Stephanie's help, trying to shift all her weight onto her uninjured leg. She glared at Yvonne, her patience wearing thin. Again, how is that your business? Shouldn't you be worrying about yourself instead of stalking me? Yvonne was momentarily taken aback by Nara's sharp tone, but quickly regained her composure. She had made it her mission to make Nara's life miserable, and she wasn't about to back down so easily. Your manager aside, don't you have a driver to pick you up? I mean, you're the wife of Gordon Antonov after all, she said mockingly, bursting into laughter, with her manager following suit. Nara's eyes narrowed in irritation. If not for the public setting and her injured ankle, she would have been tempted to give Yvonne a piece of her mind, or worse. But she knew better than to cause a scene. Yvonne, what do you want? Nara said, her voice filled with exhaustion. Haven't you done enough today? I'm in pain. Can't you just leave me alone? Meanwhile, Stephanie had been silent, choosing not to involve herself in the escalating sibling rivalry. She realized this was far deeper than a petty argument. It was a long-standing conflict between sisters, and it was best for her to stay out of it. Yvonne smirked, clearly enjoying herself. Oh, poor Nara Vespertine. Oops, I mean Antonov, she sneered. Why don't you call your dear husband? Ask him to send someone to come pick you up. Surely the great Gordon Antonov can spare a driver for his wife, right? Nara cut her off with a laugh, her frustration giving way to disbelief. Don't you ever get tired, Yvonne? Honestly, you must not have anything better to do with your life. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd rather not waste any more time on this. Yvonne's smile faded for a brief second, but she quickly regained her composure. Just then, she spotted a group of girls exiting the agency. They were her closest friends. An idea sparked into her mind and she couldn't resist. Girls, over here, she called out, waving them over. Stephanie, who had been standing quietly, sighed heavily. She leaned toward Nara and whispered, I think it's time for us to leave. This isn't going to end well. I think you're right, Nara replied, wincing slightly from the pain in her ankle. Let's go. Just as they were about to turn and leave, Yvonne grabbed Nara's arm. "Leaving so soon?" she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "But I haven't even gotten started yet." Before Nara could respond, the group of girls Yvonne had called over arrived, forming a small circle around her. Each of them eyed her critically, their expressions full of disdain. "So, this is how Nara Antonov looks up close," one of the girls said, her voice full of mock surprise. "I thought she'd be more extraordinary," another girl chimed in, her tone laced with sarcasm. "You know, with the way the press talks about her, but all I see here is mid," she said, rolling her eyes dramatically. Stephanie, unable to stay quiet any longer, spoke up. "Hey, watch how you talk to her, Nara, let's just go. We don't have time for this nonsense." "Oh, and look, this must be the girl who helped her up after her epic fall during rehearsals today," another girl sneered, her gaze shifting to Stephanie. "Well, as they say, birds of a feather flock together." The snickering from the group only grew louder as they taunted Nara and Stephanie. Nara clenched her fists, fighting back the urge to lash out. The last thing she needed was to feed into Yvonne's petty games. Her mind flashed back to her injured ankle, the botched rehearsal, and the painful day she had endured. She couldn't afford to let Yvonne push her over the edge. "Yvonne," Nara said calmly, her voice steady despite the anger boiling beneath the surface, "you can stand here and laugh with your little entourage all you want, but I have more important things to do with my life than waste it on your pathetic attempts to make me miserable." Yvonne's smirk faltered for just a second, but her pride wouldn't let her show any weakness. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Nara. You can run, but you can't hide. The world knows you for who you really are. Just wait till everyone finds out you're nothing more than a fraud," she said with a wicked grin. Stephanie tugged at Nara's arm again, more urgently this time. "Let's go, Nara. It's not worth it." Nara could no longer contain her anger. She glared at Yvonne, who stood there with her arms crossed and a smug smirk on her face, clearly enjoying the scene she had orchestrated. "I don't even know how she got signed to this agency. Most of us worked our butts off to get here, and she just gets in on a silver platter," one of the girls sneered, her voice dripping with envy. Nara looked at her but remained silent, trying to maintain her composure. "What's that look on your face?" another girl chimed in. "Just because you're Gordon's wife doesn't make you any better than us. I'm sure he married you out of pity. After all, you're not even that beautiful." That was the final straw. Nara could no longer be silent. She pulled her hand from Stephanie's grip and stepped closer to Yvonne, her eyes burning with frustration. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she said, her voice cold and controlled. "I don't have the time or energy for this childish nonsense. You can all keep bantering like madwomen." With that, Nara turned on her heel to leave, but just as she did, a sleek black luxury car with tinted windows pulled up in front of the agency. The sight of it brought an immediate change to her mood. A broad smile spread across her face as she recognized the car. It was Gordon's. "Who is that?" one of the girls asked, all eyes now focused on the car. "Must be someone important," another girl muttered, her tone shifting to curiosity. The car door swung open and a tall, well-dressed man stepped out. Stephanie's eyes widened in surprise. "Nara, isn't that your husband?" Nara, still smiling, nodded proudly. "Yes, he is." Yvonne stared at Gordon, then shifted her gaze back to Nara. The smile on Nara's face sent a surge of irritation through her. She glanced at Gordon again, noting his perfectly styled hair gleaming in the sunlight. Her eyes traced down to his outfit. He wore a white designer long-sleeve shirt paired with sleek black trousers. She couldn't deny it. He looked incredibly handsome. As he approached, a bright smile lit up his face, and the girls beside her stared at him with dreamy eyes. "Nara?" he called out warmly, his attention solely on her as he neared. Nara smiled. She was happy he came at the perfect time. She shuddered to think about what she might have said or done if he hadn't shown up just then. "How did you know I was done? I didn't even call you," Nara said, her voice light, still smiling. "I just had a hunch," Gordon replied, his grin broadening. At that moment, Stephanie cleared her throat, a subtle reminder of her presence. "Oh, meet my friend Stephanie," Nara said, introducing her with a smile. "Hello?" Gordon greeted her politely, extending his hand towards Stephanie. Stephanie took his hand warmly, a smile she couldn't control spreading across her face. "I've heard so much about you. I can't believe I'm seeing you in person," she gushed. "It's nice to meet you too," Gordon replied with a friendly smile. Then, his expression shifted as he glanced down at Nara's feet. He noticed her swollen ankle and the way she leaned on Stephanie's shoulder for support. His brow furrowed with concern. "What happened to your leg? Why does it look like this?" he asked, his face etched with worry. "Oh, this? It's nothing serious. I just need to rest, and it will be fine," Nara said, attempting to downplay the situation. The last thing she wanted was for Gordon to overreact in public. "That's not true!" Stephanie cut in, ignoring Nara's pleading eyes. "She fell during rehearsals and sprained her ankle. She can't even walk properly. It's really bad." Gordon shook his head, his concern deepening. "Then we need to get you to the hospital to have it checked out," he said without hesitation. He took Nara's hand gently, the firmness in his voice leaving no room for argument. "Oh no, it's nothing really. There's no need to go to the hospital," Nara insisted, still hoping to avoid making a fuss. "Nara, I'm not asking. We're going to the hospital," he said firmly, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for discussion. Nara sighed, recognizing the seriousness in his expression. She knew he wasn't going to back down. "Okay," she finally conceded, her voice soft. Turning to Stephanie, Nara smiled. "I'll be going now, Steph. Thanks for your help. Bye," she said, waving weakly with her free hand. Gordon, still holding Nara's hand gently, smiled at Stephanie as well. "See you again," he said with a smile. Yvonne had been standing there the entire time, watching Nara and Gordon, but it was as if she were invisible to them. Not once did they acknowledge her presence, and the longer she stood there, the more her irritation grew. She wanted to leave but found herself rooted to the spot, staring hard at them. She watched as Nara waved goodbye to Stephanie, and then Gordon gently led Nara away by the hand. They began walking out together. As they approached where Yvonne was standing, Nara stopped. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment, Nara stepped forward, deliberately stepping on Yvonne's toe. She looked at her with a smirk and continued walking as if nothing had happened, leaving Yvonne frozen in shock. Gordon, oblivious to what had just transpired, opened the car door for Nara. He helped her inside, carefully guiding her because of her limp. Just before shutting the door, Nara leaned out and waved one last goodbye to Stephanie, who was still standing nearby. The car door closed, Gordon had entered. Within moments, they were gone, leaving Yvonne standing there, her emotions swirling into a rage. Her toe throbbed from Nara's intentional step, but that wasn't what infuriated her the most. What truly stung was the way Gordon had completely ignored her. She, Yvonne, who had once boasted to her friends about knowing Gordon Antonov, had been treated like a stranger. He hadn't even looked in her direction, let alone acknowledged her presence. "I thought you said you knew Gordon Antonov?" one of the girls standing with her asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. They had all been waiting, hoping Gordon would at least acknowledge Yvonne, if only for a brief moment. From there they had hoped to use that opening to introduce themselves, but to their utter disappointment Gordon hadn't so much as glanced their way. His entire focus had been on Nara, as if no one else existed. "Yeah, Yvonne, I thought you said you knew him, because it sure didn't seem like it just now," another girl added, her tone biting. "He didn't even look at you, much less acknowledge your presence." Yvonne's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She shot them a fierce look, her voice rising as she barked, "Get the hell out of my face!" Her outburst startled the girls, and before they could react, Yvonne shoved them aside, storming off in a huff. The girls exchanged confused glances before one of them turned her frustration toward Stephanie, who had been silently watching the whole exchange. "What are you looking at?" one of them snapped at her. Stephanie, unable to contain herself any longer, burst into laughter. Her body shook as the laughter escaped her, loud and carefree. The girls looked at her with disgust, clearly upset by her amusement. "Please, let's get out of here before this low-grade model infects us with her dirty, ugly laugh," one of them muttered disdainfully. With that, they turned and walked off, leaving Stephanie laughing behind them. Still chuckling, Stephanie made her way to her luxury bus where her manager, Luke, had been waiting patiently. Seeing her approach, Luke opened the door for her and she climbed in, still giggling. "If karma was a person," she said between laughs as the door shut behind her. Meanwhile, Elena had been standing in the shadows, observing everything from a distance. She had been there the entire time, even when Yvonne and her group were throwing insults at Nara. Initially, she had been on the verge of stepping in to defend her friend, but something stopped her. In some twisted way, she found the verbal altercations amusing. So she decided to stay back and see how things played out. Then Gordon had appeared and her attention shifted. She had never seen him up close before. Even when she went to pick Nara up from their mansion, Gordon had always been just a distant figure, someone she only caught glimpses of from afar. But today she saw him clearly, his confident demeanor, his handsome face, his protective nature toward Nara. Her amusement quickly faded as jealousy flared within her. When Nara introduced Stephanie to Gordon, Elena felt a deep pang of annoyance. Why would Nara introduce Stephanie before her? Nara had never made an effort to introduce her to Gordon. And now Stephanie, someone she had only just recently met, was getting the introduction first. The thought burned Elena. She had always prided herself on her friendship with Nara, and now she felt sidelined. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as anger coursed through her. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She deserved to be introduced to Gordon before anyone else. As everyone began to disperse, she finally emerged from her hiding spot, her face set in a determined frown. She clenched her fists in anger, breathing heavily. Gordon's driver pulled the car to a stop in front of the largest hospital in town. The sight of the towering building with its bright lights and bustling entrance filled Nara with dread. As soon as she realized where they were, a wave of anxiety swept over her. Marriage? To Briston? Hospitals had always made her uncomfortable. It stirred up memories she had been trying to forget. Ever since her mother's death, she had avoided hospitals altogether. Just being near one made her feel uneasy, and the thought of stepping inside sent chills down her spine. Gordon, I really don't think it's necessary to go in, she said, her voice tense. Let's just go home. Nara, look at your ankle, Gordon replied softly but firmly. It's swollen. You can barely walk on it. We won't spend much time here, I promise. We'll get the doctor to check on you, and then we can leave. She opened her mouth to protest again, but fell silent. She thought about telling him the real reason she didn't want to go in, the trauma of her mother's death and her deep-rooted fear of hospitals. But something stopped her. She didn't want to burden him with her emotional baggage, so she simply sighed and nodded. Okay, fine, she relented. But you promise we won't stay long? Gordon smiled, his eyes softening. I promise, he said, then quickly stepped out of the car. He walked over to her side, opened the door, and helped her out. Her ankle looked worse than ever, red, swollen, and throbbing. She winced as she tried to put weight on it, and Gordon immediately supported her, guiding her carefully into the hospital. As soon as they walked through the entrance, a nurse at the reception desk spotted them. She nudged the nurse beside her and whispered, Isn't that Gordon Antonoff and his wife, the model? The other nurse turned to look in their direction. Yes, that's him. Oh, look, she's limping. Quick, get a wheelchair, she instructed. The nurse wasted no time grabbing a nearby wheelchair and wheeling it over to where Gordon and Nara stood. What happened to her? The nurse asked gently, her eyes filled with concern. She fell and twisted her ankle, Gordon explained, his voice calm but urgent. You're going to be all right, the nurse reassured Nara, her tone soothing. She turned the wheelchair around to make it easier for Nara to sit down. Gordon and the nurse helped her into the chair, making sure she was comfortable before the nurse started wheeling her toward the elevator, with Gordon following closely behind. The elevator doors opened to reveal a sleek, modern corridor. As they stepped out, the nurse wheeled Nara into a room marked VIP. When the door swung open, Nara's eyes widened in surprise. What are we doing here? She asked, glancing at Gordon. This is the room you'll be staying in, he replied, smiling softly. Nara looked around in awe. The room was nothing like what she had expected. It was enormous, easily the largest hospital room she had ever seen. In one corner stood a massive television, and the bed was so spacious that it could comfortably fit 4 people. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers, and the bright lighting gave the room a warm, inviting glow. The nurse quickly moved to open the curtains, revealing large, sleek windows that let in natural light. She then returned to Nara, wheeling her toward the bed. With practiced ease, she helped her to her feet and gently guided her onto the bed. Gordon walked over to them, concern etched on his face. "Who's getting the doctor?" he asked, his voice quiet but tense. "Don't worry, sir. I'll go get him right away. Make yourselves comfortable," she said with a reassuring smile. "Please hurry. She's in pain," Gordon added, his voice laced with urgency. The nurse nodded and quickly left the room, leaving Nara and Gordon alone. Nara sighed deeply, feeling the weight of her anxiety settle on her chest. Her mind wasn't focused on the doctor or the injury anymore. What really terrified her was the thought of getting an injection. Ever since she was a child, she had been deathly afraid of needles, and the idea of facing that fear now made her stomach churn. Gordon noticed the worry on her face. "Don't worry," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "The doctor will be here soon, and you'll be fine." Nara nodded, trying to muster a smile, but her nerves were getting the better of her. She considered telling Gordon that it wasn't the doctor she was worried about, it was the needles. But when she looked into his eyes, filled with concern and care, she didn't want to appear weak or childish. She clenched the bedsheets tightly, her heart beating loudly. How would she tell him that she was scared of an injection? There was a knock on the door, and it opened to reveal a tall, middle-aged man wearing a lab coat, a stethoscope hanging loosely around his neck. Nara immediately guessed that he was the doctor the nurse had gone to fetch. The nurse stood beside him, holding a tray with syringes, injections, and bandages. "Dr. Lewis," Gordon said with a smile the moment he saw the doctor. Louis grinned back. "Gordon, my friend in the flesh." He walked over and embraced him warmly. "It's been how many years now? It's good to see you again," Louis continued after they broke away from the hug. "You still look as young as ever," Gordon said, returning the smile. "Oh, don't tease me," Louis chuckled. "You know, when Nurse Anna told me you were here, I couldn't believe it. I had to come see it for myself. And here you are. It's really you." Louis's eyes then shifted to Nara, and his smile broadened. "And this must be your lovely wife." Gordon chuckled softly. "Oh, forgive me. Louis, this is my wife, Nara." He gestured toward her. Louis nodded warmly. "I remember hearing that you got married, Gordon. I didn't believe it back then either. Hello, Nara," he said, smiling at her. "Hello," Nara replied softly, still adjusting to the sudden relationship between the doctor and Gordon. She had never known Gordon to have close friends. Aside from family, it was always just Jeffrey and Stella. She smiled, though giving Louis a curious glance. "I didn't know Gordon had friends?" Both men laughed heartily. "You see, Nara, Louis and I go way back. We met in college," Gordon explained, gently tapping her shoulder. "Oh, that explains it," Nara said, smiling. Louis's attention shifted to Nara's ankle, which was red and swollen. "And what do we have here?" he asked softly, crouching to examine it. "How did this happen?" His fingers lightly touched the swollen area, causing Nara to wince in pain. "Ouch!" she gasped. "Does it hurt that much?" Louis asked, concerned. "Yes," Nara replied, her face contorted with discomfort. "Well, tell me how it happened," he said, his focus still on her ankle as though trying to determine the cause of the swelling. "I fell during rehearsals," Nara explained. Louis nodded thoughtfully, examining the injury more closely. "Looks like a sprain, but we'll need to take some precautions. Nurse Anna, prepare the injection. We need to get the swelling down before we can do anything else." He looked up at Nara with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. You'll be on your feet in no time." "Lest I forget, what kind of height did you fall from?" Louis asked, his voice filled with concern. Nara shook her head. "Well, I wouldn't exactly call it a fall. I sprained my ankle while wearing heels during rehearsals." "Oh, that explains it," Louis said, nodding thoughtfully. "Well, not to worry. A little painkiller, an injection, and wrapping your ankle in a bandage will do the trick." "Injection?" Nara blurted out, her voice laced with anxiety. "Yes," Louis replied, seemingly oblivious to the fear creeping into her voice. Nara swallowed hard, clutching the bedsheets nervously. How could she admit to them that she was terrified of needles? The mere thought made her palms sweaty. "Nurse Anna, come over here," Louis called, gesturing to the nurse who had been quietly standing in the corner observing the situation. Anna smiled warmly and walked over, positioning herself near the foot of the bed. Meanwhile, Gordon made his way to the other side and sat beside Nara, offering her a comforting presence. She glanced at him but couldn't focus. Her mind was consumed by thoughts of the impending injection. Louis leaned down, examining her ankle closely. Looking at it, nothing seems to be broken. I'll just apply some ointment and wrap it up. Okay, Nara muttered under her breath, though her mind was still fixated on the injection. She fidgeted slightly, biting her lip. Anna, the ointment, please, Louis said, stretching out his hand. Anna quickly handed him a tube of ointment. Louis opened it and began gently rubbing it on Nara's swollen ankle. His hands moved smoothly and carefully over the tender skin. But despite his gentle touch, Nara winced, closing her eyes as the pain flared. Soon after, she felt a cloth being tied around her ankle. When she opened her eyes, Louis was already securing the bandage with a small pin. There we go, he said, giving the bandage a final check. Did it hurt? Nara shook her head, forcing a small smile in return. Good, Louis said, smiling warmly. Now, something to ease the pain. He stretched his hand out to Anna, who promptly handed him a syringe. Nara's eyes widened as she watched Louis raise the syringe, tapping it lightly to ensure the correct dosage. The sight of it made her stomach turn, and her heart pounded faster in her chest. She glanced at Gordon, then back at the needle, trying to summon the courage to speak up. This won't hurt one bit, I promise, Louis said, noticing the fear in her expression, but Nara could feel her hands growing clammy, her pulse quickening. She turned to Gordon, her eyes filled with desperation. It was now or never. She couldn't keep quiet any longer. Gordon? She whispered, her voice trembling. I'm scared of injections. Gordon looked at her, his face softening with understanding. He smiled reassuringly and turned to Louis. Is the injection really necessary? He asked, his tone gentle but firm. Louis raised an eyebrow and glanced between them. Yes, I'm afraid it is. This will help ease the pain and reduce the inflammation. Nara's breathing grew shallow as she tried to calm herself. It's okay, he said softly. You'll be fine. Gordon said softly, trying to calm her nerves. Louis, sensing Nara's fear, softened his approach. I understand that injections can be scary, Nara, but I promise this will make things better. I'll be quick and you'll barely feel it. Nara hesitated, her fear still gripping her, but Gordon's presence beside her and Louis's calm demeanor made her feel slightly more at ease. She gave a small nod, still nervous but willing to trust them. Louis smiled reassuringly. That's the spirit. He moved closer, positioning the syringe carefully. Take a deep breath. Don't worry, it won't hurt, Gordon said, trying to reassure Nara. Are you sure? She asked, her voice shaky. I promise, he replied with a warm smile. She reluctantly extended her arm and Louis raised the syringe, slowly bringing it closer to her skin. As the needle neared her flesh, she squeezed her eyes shut and turned her head away, bracing for the pain. Just as she was about to cry out, she felt a hand tightly clasp hers. It was Gordon. His warm hand covered hers, and the tension in her body began to ease. As Louis gently pushed the needle through her skin, she was surprised to feel nothing. There was no sharp sting, no pain at all. It was as if the needle hadn't even pierced her skin. Slowly, she opened her eyes and glanced at Gordon, who was still holding her hand. I told you it wouldn't hurt, didn't I? He whispered with a soft smile. Nara let out a small sigh of relief, her fear fading away. She smiled back at him, realizing that his presence had made all the difference. Andrew was sitting in his living room watching the news, enjoying a rare moment of peace, when a loud banging on the door cut through the silencer. At first he tried to ignore it, hoping whoever it was would tire and leave, but the knocking only grew more insistent, each bang louder than the last. He sighed deeply, his patience thinning, and reluctantly switched off the television. Rising slowly from his chair, he dragged himself toward the door. When he opened it, he was met with the fierce, angry eyes of Elena glaring at him. What are you doing here? Andrew asked, confused. Elena didn't answer right away. She looked him up and down with clear disdain before brushing past him, storming into his house as if she owned the place. Andrew turned, still perplexed by her sudden appearance. Elena, what the hell are you doing here? He snapped, slamming the door shut behind him. Elena shot him a withering glare, her whole body trembling with fury. She could feel her anger rising to the point where she feared one more wrong word from him would force her to do something she might regret. "Oh, don't give me that look," Andrew continued, his frustration building. "What the hell are you doing here? I never even gave you my address." Before he could utter another word, Elena moved swiftly toward him. In a flash, her hand came crashing across his face, delivering a sharp, thunderous slap. Andrew stood frozen, his hand instinctively going to his stinging cheek. He was still reeling from the blow when another slap landed just as fiercely, sending stars across his vision. "What the hell was that for?" he shouted, his face red with both shock and anger. "Utter one more foolish word," Elena warned, her voice low and dangerous, "and I'll give you another one right across that ugly face of yours." Andrew's anger flared. "Elena, this is no longer funny. You show up at my house unannounced and then slap me? What the hell is wrong with you?" Her eyes flashed with rage. "And I'll do it again and again if I have to. Who the hell do you think you are, Andrew?" "What are you even talking about?" Andrew asked, utterly confused. "Didn't I tell you to fix the mess you caused? You told Nara that I was the one who told you about the contract. Now she won't even look me in the eye. I told you to fix this, Andrew, and you did nothing." Andrew let out a bitter laugh, rubbing his jaw where her slap still stung. "So that is what this is about?" He stretched his mouth as if testing whether his teeth were still intact. "That slap was hard enough to knock a tooth loose." Elena crossed her arms, glaring at him. "What else would this be about, Andrew? Do you think I came to your house to play games? Fix the mess you created." Andrew smiled, but it was far from warm. It was the kind of smile someone wore when they were trying to keep their composure. "You know, Elena, I'll forgive you for the slaps. I'll forgive you because you're Nara's best friend, and I respect that. But don't think for 1 second that gives you the right to barge into my house and start hitting me." Andrew shook his head. "I'll fix things with Nara in my own time. But right now, you need to pick up your little, disgusting self and leave my house before this gets any uglier." For a moment, the two stood there, glaring at each other, the tension between them thick and heavy. Finally, Elena scoffed, turning on her heel and marching toward the door. Andrew stood still, watching Elena, his expression a mixture of irritation and amusement. "Goodbye, Elena," he said coldly, slamming the door shut. But Elena, instead of leaving, smirked and turned back toward him. Her eyes gleamed with mischief. "You keep pushing me," she said, taking a step closer. "I won't let your stupid mistake ruin my plans." She leaned in, her voice low and dangerous. "Listen carefully, Andrew. The moment I walk out that door, I'm heading straight to Nara. I'll tell her all about our little secret. You see, I have nothing to lose. We're not even on speaking terms anymore. But you have everything to lose." Andrew's face tightened with anger. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed, locking eyes with her. Elena's smirk only deepened. She moved closer, her lips just inches from his ear. "Try me," she whispered softly, her breath warm against his skin. Penelope stood outside the motel where she usually met Peter, her dark sunglasses shielding her eyes as she leaned against her car. She was clearly anxious, her body tense, and she bit her fingers nervously with every second that passed. Her eyes darted left and right, scanning the area to ensure no one was watching her. She was waiting for Peter, but something about this particular meeting was making her more uneasy than usual. Suddenly, Peter came out of the motel. The moment she saw him, she let out a small sigh of relief, though her anxiety didn't completely fade. She hurried toward him, her voice laced with curiosity and concern. "What kept you in there? What did he say?" she asked, her face strained with anticipation. Peter sighed, shaking his head. "He says every room has been occupied," he replied, his voice heavy with disappointment. Hearing this, she felt a wave of unexpected relief. In fact, she was elated. The thought of not going through with meeting with Peter lifted a huge weight off her shoulders. Though she hid her emotions to avoid aggravating him, she masked her relief with a look of concern, playing her part. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, pretending to care. Peter scratched his head, looking around as though an answer would appear out of thin air. "Well, not to worry. I'll find us another place," he said with determination. The mere mention of another motel made Penelope's heart race in panic. She didn't want to go to another motel. All she wanted was to go home. The very thought of being with him again sent shivers down her spine. She needed an excuse, and she needed it fast. I don't think that would be possible, she muttered softly, her voice barely audible. Peter stopped and turned to face her, his brows furrowing in confusion. What do you mean by that? He asked, his tone shifting, serious now. Penelope swallowed hard, trying to think quickly. Well, it's getting late, and Jacob will be back soon, she said, hoping he would accept her excuse. So? Peter shot back, his question catching her off guard. Come on, Peter, be reasonable. It's getting dark and you can just reschedule this for another day, she urged, trying to maintain her composure. Peter's eyes narrowed, his tone becoming sharp. Since when did you start calling the shots, huh? I make the decisions here, I say what happens. And right now, I say, you get in your car, I get in mine, and we find an empty motel. Understand? Penelope sighed deeply. She was running out of options and patience. That's impossible, I need to get home. Unlike you, I have a partner who actually cares if I'm not back on time, she said, though she immediately regretted the words. She knew Jacob didn't care if she returned that night or the next, but at that moment she didn't care either. She just needed to get away from Peter. Peter's face darkened, his anger quickly bubbling to the surface. What do you mean by that? Are you trying to insult my wife? He snapped. Penelope scoffed, crossing her arms. Well, am I lying? She shot back, her voice laced with sarcasm. Peter's eyes flashed with fury, his face turning red as his fists clenched at his sides. Don't you ever bring my wife into your stupid little talks, he barked, stepping closer, his voice rising in anger. Penelope stood her ground, but her heart was pounding. She knew she had pushed too far, but the truth was, she didn't care anymore. All she wanted was to leave, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't going to let him control what happened next. Penelope shuddered slightly, but she didn't say a word. Instead, she rolled her eyes and stood there, waiting for him to finish his outburst so she could leave in peace. You think I didn't know what you did? Peter suddenly growled. Penelope turned to look at him, her expression one of skepticism. What are you talking about? She asked, genuinely confused. Peter's eyes blazed with fury as he stepped closer. You think I didn't see the marks on her neck? You think I wouldn't figure it out, huh? Penelope sighed dramatically, and a smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Oh, that, she replied, her tone mocking as a small laugh escaped her. You know you should thank your stars that Nara walked in when she did, or else what? Peter snapped, cutting her off. Well, Penelope continued coolly, you know me, and you know what I'm capable of. If Nara hadn't barged in, you and I would be having a very different conversation right now. Her voice was sharp, unapologetic, as she fired back at him without a hint of remorse. Peter's face flushed with rage. He was furious, not just at what she'd done to his wife, Miriam, but at how little Penelope seemed to care. She didn't show even a flicker of guilt as she gloated about her actions. Before she could react, Peter stormed over to her, his hands shooting out to grab her by the neck, pressing her against the car. His grip tightened, his eyes burning with anger. Let this be the last time you lay a finger on Miriam, he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. Or I swear you won't like the consequences. His hand remained firmly on her throat, but she didn't struggle. She didn't even try to break free. Instead, to his utter surprise, she burst into laughter. Her eyes glinted with something dark, something menacing as she smiled up at him. Let me tell you something, Peter, she said with a cold, mocking grin. This is just the beginning. And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep that pathetic wife of yours far, far away from me, because the more you keep having an affair with me, the more miserable I'll make her life. Peter was taken aback. He had always known Penelope to be bold and fearless, but the venom in her voice now was new. There was a deep, burning hatred in her eyes, a look that he recognized all too well. It was the same look he saw in his own reflection every day. He realized in that moment that she wasn't bluffing. She meant every word. Slowly, he released his grip on her neck, stepping back as he tried to calm himself. You know what? He said, his voice suddenly quieter, almost defeated. I'm not in the mood anymore. Go home. I thought as much, Penelope replied, smirking. She was elated. Her plan had worked. At least for today, she wouldn't have to endure another miserable meeting with him. Peter stood there for a moment, staring at her as if trying to figure her out, but there was nothing left to say. He straightened his shirt, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Without another word, he turned and walked away, heading for his car, which was parked directly behind Penelope's. He got in, slammed the door, and with a quick rev of the engine, sped off without so much as a glance back. The tires kicked up a trail of dust as he drove away, leaving Penelope standing there, watching him disappear into the distance. She coughed, waving her hands to clear the dust that Peter's car had kicked up. As she swept her hands from left to right, a figure began to emerge through the settling haze. She blinked, trying to make out who it was, and as the dust finally cleared, her heart dropped into her stomach. Standing before her was Gwen Vespertine, Yvonne's mother. A rush of panic coursed through her. Had Gwen seen Peter? Worse, had she overheard their conversation? Beads of sweat began to form on her forehead as she ran through a million questions in her mind. She forced herself to remain composed, knowing she couldn't show any sign of weakness. If Gwen had witnessed something, she needed to be strong, or Gwen would use it against her. Gwen, on the other hand, looked entirely at ease. She smiled, waving at Penelope with a smug, knowing expression as she sauntered closer. Well, 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 if it isn't Penelope Antonov herself, Gwen said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Penelope stared at her, trying to remain unbothered. She knew she had to act unshaken, no matter what Gwen might know. With a deep sigh, she asked, "What do you want, Gwen?" Gwen's smile widened. "Oh, I was just in the neighborhood visiting a friend. And surprise, surprise, I run into you. I thought I'd come over and say hello." Her voice was sweet, but Penelope could sense the malice behind her words. "Well, you've said your hello. You can leave now," she replied curtly, hoping to end the conversation. Gwen turned to walk away but stopped abruptly, a glint of amusement in her eyes. "Tell me, Penelope, what brings someone like you to the outskirts of town? Surely this isn't your usual place," she asked, her tone loaded with mischief. Penelope straightened her back, unwilling to give Gwen the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "How is that any of your business, Gwen? You'd best be on your way and stop poking your nose into matters that don't concern you," Penelope retorted, her voice firm. Gwen chuckled softly and stepped even closer, her eyes narrowing. "Well, since you refuse to tell me what you're doing here, I suppose you also won't divulge the identity of the man I just saw you with, will you?" Gwen asked, her voice dripping with amusement. Penelope's heart skipped a beat, but she refused to let Gwen see her falter. She remained silent, glaring at Gwen, knowing that giving any more information would only make things worse. But the look on Gwen's face made it clear she had seen Peter and she would have to tread carefully from here on out. Penelope gulped, her heart racing. Gosh, she saw him, she thought, her mind whirling. But she couldn't afford to appear weak. She needed to put up a strong front. "Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Gwen, but clearly there was no one here, just me," she said, her voice firm and steady. Gwen burst into laughter, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Are you trying to pull my leg or what?" Penelope sighed, growing impatient. "Gwen, I don't have time for this nonsense." "Oh, really? Then who was choking you, huh? The man who had his hands around your neck?" Gwen pressed, smirking as if she already knew the answer. "Like I said," Penelope replied, her voice unwavering, "you must have seen wrong. I was the only one standing here." Gwen smiled knowingly. She could tell Penelope was lying, trying to cover her tracks. Gwen had come to visit a friend and had spotted Penelope and Peter talking when she was getting into her car. At first she didn't believe her eyes, but as she moved closer it became clear who she had seen. The only mistake she'd made was not taking a picture as evidence. "Well, if you're done with your questioning, I'll be on my way. It's getting late," Penelope said, eager to leave. "Yeah, sure," Gwen finally said, her tone casual but still laced with suspicion. Penelope got into her car and let out a long sigh of relief. Her mind was spinning with mixed emotions. She knew Gwen didn't buy her lie. Gwen was too sharp to be easily deceived, and she could feel it. But she had no choice but to stick to her story and hope Gwen would let it go. As Penelope drove away, Gwen stood watching her, her suspicions growing. Something was off, and it was clear Penelope was hiding something. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this that met the eye. Who was the man she had seen with Penelope, and why was she so desperate to hide his identity? As she turned her gaze toward the motel signboard, A realization hit her. She let out a hearty laugh, the pieces slowly coming together in her mind. "This is going to be interesting," she muttered to herself. Briston sat in the dimly lit five-star restaurant, his eyes repeatedly flicking toward the door, as if expecting someone to walk in any moment. He checked his watch again, the frustration clear on his face each time he glanced at the ticking hands. His teeth clicked in irritation, a habit that surfaced whenever impatience gnawed at him. The soft strains of classical music filled the air, mingling with the gentle clatter of cutlery and murmured conversations, but Briston barely noticed. He had been waiting for hours, and Yvonne still hadn't shown up. Leaning back in his chair, he let out a long sigh. His hand reached into his pocket, and he pulled out a small velvet case. Inside, nestled on the satin, was a diamond bracelet, its shimmering stones catching the dim light of the restaurant. He had planned to give it to Yvonne as an apology, a gesture to show her how much she meant to him. A polite voice interrupted his thoughts. "Good evening, sir." A tall waiter greeted him. The man was dressed impeccably in a white shirt and a sleek red jacket, with a matching bow tie completing the formal look. Briston looked up, startled from his reverie, and quickly closed the case, slipping it back into his trouser pocket. "Yes?" he responded, slightly irritated by the interruption. "Sir, you've been sitting here for quite some time now, but you haven't placed an order," the waiter remarked, his tone professional yet firm. Briston frowned. "I'm waiting for someone. She'll be here any minute, and then we'll order together." "I understand, sir, but I must inform you that our restaurant policy requires that you order something. Otherwise, we may have to ask you to leave," the waiter said, politely but unyielding. Briston stared at the waiter, knowing there was no convincing him to bend the rules. After a brief pause, he sighed and relented. "Fine, get me a bottle of champagne." The waiter nodded, jotting down the order. "Will that be all, sir?" "Yes, that will be all for now," Briston replied, his tone sharp with irritation. "Very well, sir." The waiter bowed courteously and walked away, leaving Briston alone with his thoughts once more. He sighed again, glancing toward the door. Still no sign of Yvonne. His fingers hovered over his phone, about to call her, when the creak of the door caught his attention. He looked up, and there she was, standing in the entrance. The sight of Yvonne instantly lifted the weight off his chest. He stood up quickly, waving to get her attention, his face lit up with relief. She smiled at him, but there was something calculating in her expression. It wasn't the warm smile of someone excited to see him, it was the smile of someone whose plan was falling into place. Yvonne had intentionally kept him waiting. She knew the effect it would have on him, and she wanted him to feel desperate, eager to please. Briston, unaware of her true intentions, waved enthusiastically like a hopeful puppy, relieved his wait was finally over. She waved back, before making her way toward him. As she approached, he hurried to pull out her chair for her, trying to be as considerate as possible despite his mounting frustration. "Thank you," Yvonne said softly, sitting down in the chair he offered. Her voice was calm and sweet, betraying none of the manipulation she had planned. Briston nodded, moving back to his own seat across from her. He sat down, trying to contain the mixture of relief and irritation that battled inside him. "I thought you weren't going to come," he said, his voice strained, but trying to sound nonchalant. Yvonne smiled again, but this time it felt like a mask. "I'm here now, aren't I?" she replied smoothly, her words evasive but spoken with confidence. At that moment, the waiter returned with the bottle of champagne and the wineglass Briston had ordered. "Your order, sir?" the waiter said calmly, placing the items on the table. He then turned to Yvonne with a polite smile. "And for you, ma'am? What can I get you?" Yvonne glanced at Briston, then at the bottle of champagne in front of her. She smiled softly before turning her attention back to the waiter. "I'm not really that hungry. Just bring me another glass and I'll join him with the champagne." "Of course, ma'am," the waiter replied, and quickly left to fetch another glass. Briston cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "I'm sorry I didn't order anything for you earlier. I wanted to wait until you got here before placing any orders, but—" Yvonne interrupted him, shaking her head. "Oh, no, don't worry about it. Besides, I was the one who arrived late. I'm not even hungry, so really you don't need to feel bad." She smiled reassuringly. "Are you sure?" Briston asked, still sounding slightly concerned. Yvonne nodded, her smile unwavering. I'm sure. He nodded, falling into a brief silence as he studied her. Then he looked at her and smiled warmly. You look beautiful today, he said, his voice soft with admiration. Yvonne laughed lightly, flipping her hair over her shoulder. You know I always do, she teased, her eyes twinkling. Briston chuckled, but then his expression grew more serious. He cleared his throat again, straightening in his chair. Actually, I wanted us to talk about what happened yesterday. He paused for a moment, searching for the right words to avoid causing any offense. After I went home and thought about everything, I realized I was the one at fault. I overwhelmed you with the news and I deserve the slap I got. I'm truly sorry for that. Yvonne's smile faded slightly, her expression softening. No, Briston, you don't need to apologize, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I should be the one apologizing. You didn't deserve to be slapped in the face. I was overwhelmed, but that's no excuse for how I acted. I'm sorry for raising my hand and my voice at you. You didn't deserve that. Briston looked at her, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He had entered the restaurant with a heavy heart, fearing that their conversation might take a turn for the worse, just like their last encounter. But hearing Yvonne apologize so sincerely softened something in him. Her remorse was unexpected, and it eased his tension. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet case again. Here? He said, handing it to her. Yvonne's eyes lit up with curiosity and excitement. What's this? She asked, smiling as she took the case from him. You won't know unless you open it, Briston replied with a grin. She carefully opened the case and her eyes widened in delight when she saw the diamond bracelet inside. Oh my God, it's beautiful, she exclaimed, her voice brimming with excitement. Do you like it? Briston asked, his voice hopeful. Of course. Who wouldn't? Yvonne replied, still admiring the sparkling bracelet. Come on, let me help you try it on, he offered, reaching out to take the bracelet from her. He lifted it carefully from the case and gently wrapped it around her wrist. With a practiced motion, he fastened the clasp, securing it in place. Yvonne gazed down at her wrist, her smile widening as she admired the way the diamonds caught the light. It's so beautiful, she whispered, almost in awe. That's because you're beautiful, Briston said, his voice soft and sincere. He reached for her hand, holding her wrist gently. His eyes were filled with genuine affection and concern as he spoke the words that had been weighing on his heart for so long. Yvonne, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Her breath hitched slightly at his words, her eyes flickering with emotion. For a moment she looked down at the bracelet, then back up at him. The weight of his confession hung in the air between them, but there was something more, something unspoken lingering behind her eyes. She looked at him and smiled. It's about time, she thought to herself, her smile deepening. She had been waiting patiently for him to bring up talks about love, knowing it would be the perfect moment to set her second plan in motion. Briston, unaware of her inner thoughts, continued, his voice trembling with emotion. Yvonne, I don't know what will become of me if you leave. I can't bear it. I won't bear it. His eyes began to water and she seized the opportunity. I love you, Briston. I love you so much, and I don't even mind whatever date you choose. You're the one I want to marry. His eyes widened in surprise and excitement. Really? He asked, almost unable to believe what he was hearing. Of course, Yvonne said, smiling sweetly. I can't wait to finally get married to you. Overwhelmed with joy, Briston lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. I love you, he whispered softly, his heart swelling with happiness. I love you too, Yvonne replied, her smile never fading. At that moment the waiter returned, holding the wine glass Yvonne had requested earlier. He placed it gently on the table. Enjoy, he said with a polite nod before leaving them alone once again. Briston nodded in acknowledgement, then reached for the champagne bottle. He poured some of its sparkling contents into both their glasses and handed Yvonne hers. Cheers, he said, lifting his glass with a bright smile. Yvonne raised her glass as well. To love and marriage, she echoed, her smile radiant. To love and marriage, Briston repeated, clinking his glass with hers. They both took a sip of their drinks. As Yvonne sipped her champagne, she glanced at Briston over the rim of her glass and smiled again. She had him exactly where she wanted, wrapped around her finger without much effort. She knew that manipulating Gordon, her true target, was going to be far more difficult, which is why she decided to start with the easiest route. Briston. Briston was her first step in a much larger plan. She needed him to invest in her father's failing company, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen, even if it meant marrying him. Nara slowly opened her eyes, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, and it dawned on her that she was still in the hospital. She must have fallen asleep after the injection. Glancing toward the window, she noticed it was already dark. How long have I been asleep? She wondered groggily. Despite the lingering drowsiness, a wave of exhaustion still washed over her. As she shifted to sit up, her gaze landed on him. Gordon. He was slumped in one of the small hospital sofas, his hands pressed against his cheeks, fast asleep. His head moved from side to side, searching for a more comfortable position. A pang of pity washed over her. He must be so uncomfortable, she thought. Nara looked at the hospital bed she lay in. It was large enough for the two of them, but the idea of sharing a bed with Gordon made her hesitate. Still, watching him struggle to find comfort tugged at her conscience. Gordon. Gordon, she called softly, her voice audible enough to wake him. Gordon stirred, slowly opening his eyes. "Oh, you're awake," he said groggily, stifling a yawn. "Not really. It seems like you're uncomfortable over there. You can join me here," she said, motioning to the empty space beside her on the bed. Gordon blinked in surprise. "On the bed?" "Yes." He hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Don't worry, I'm fine here," he said quickly, trying to sound reassuring. "You know I'm not asking," Nara replied firmly. Gordon chuckled, realizing she had just used his own line against him. He had no choice but to comply. In truth, the sofa had been a terrible place to sleep, and he had been more than uncomfortable. "You don't need to worry. I will use the pillows to create a boundary." She began arranging the pillows between them, trying to establish a makeshift barrier. But Gordon, still amused, stood up and stretched before walking toward the bed. "You don't need to do that," he said, watching her with a small smile. "Huh?" she asked, confused, her hands still busy with the pillows. Gordon lowered himself onto the bed slowly. "Just get some rest. There's no need for a boundary," he said softly, his voice gentle. Nara stared at him, surprised by his calm demeanor. After a moment, she sighed and placed the pillows back in their original positions. She lay down beside him, her heart racing. This was the first time they had ever shared a bed, and even though there was space between them, it still felt close. "Good night," she whispered, pulling the blanket over both of them, her voice barely audible. Gordon turned slightly, his eyes soft as he looked at her. "Good night," he murmured back. Nara closed her eyes, trying to calm her heartbeat, her mind racing with the strange sense of closeness between them. Penelope woke up unusually early that morning, her mind still clouded by the events of the previous day. She had spent most of the night tossing and turning, deeply troubled by her encounter with Gwen. She was certain Gwen had seen Peter, and an unsettling feeling gnawed at her that somehow Gwen knew exactly why she and Peter had met at the motel. She had always been careful, ensuring she left no loose ends whenever she snuck away to see him. Gwen was the last person she had expected to run into that day. As Penelope lay in bed the night before, Jacob's loud grunting in his sleep was the only sound breaking the silence of the late hours. She sighed, turning her back to him. Since the disastrous dinner that had spiraled into chaos, the house had been filled with a thick, uncomfortable quiet. Briston hadn't been home since then, and, in a way, she was glad. At least it was quite enough time for Jacob's simmering anger to subside. It was ironic, though. They still shared the same bed, yet barely exchanged a word. During meals, the silence was so heavy one could hear a pin drop. This morning, however, Penelope resolved to put the whole Gwen situation behind her. After all, Gwen didn't know Peter personally, and she couldn't be entirely certain of what Gwen had seen. If she ever became a problem, she knew she would have to handle it, one way or another. Determined to fix the tension between her and Jacob, she decided to make the first move. She knew it would hurt her pride, but she didn't care. Ever since their fight, Jacob had stopped speaking to her, and it annoyed her. She needed to know what was happening in the company. She needed to know his plans, and she knew the only way she could do that was to make peace with him. As she applied her makeup, she stole occasional glances at him. He was still fast asleep. She had planned to prepare his favorite breakfast, hoping it could serve as a peace offering. That was why she woke up very early. After carefully applying her makeup, she changed into one of the dresses Jacob had bought for her, a vibrant yellow one that hugged her figure just right. She knew how much Jacob liked seeing her in this dress, and she was sure it would at least bring a smile to his face. Standing in front of the large mirror in the corner of their bedroom, she admired herself briefly. The reflection showed her looking poised and radiant, just as she had planned. Satisfied, she quietly opened the bedroom door and left, heading straight to the kitchen, her resolve firm. Today would be different, and she was determined to make things right. The kitchen, an expansive space capable of accommodating over 15 chefs, was a masterpiece of design. Every detail had been meticulously arranged by Grace Antonoff, Jacob's late wife. Grace had poured her heart into this kitchen, choosing every utensil with care, and her influence was still very much seen despite her being dead. Even the engraved initials on the kitchen tools were a testament to how much she had loved this space. After her passing, Jacob had made it clear that nothing was to be altered, despite Penelope's many requests to make changes. This room, with its memories of Grace, was to remain untouched. As Penelope entered the kitchen that morning, the staff, dressed in crisp white aprons and caps, were already hard at work. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Her unexpected appearance caused a sudden pause in activity, and the chefs immediately stopped what they were doing and bowed in unison. "Good morning," they echoed, surprise evident in their voices. It was a rare sight to see Penelope in the kitchen, and their curiosity was piqued. Penelope, however, didn't return the greeting. She simply surveyed the room, her eyes moving from one chef to the next, inspecting their attire and the dishes they were preparing. After a moment, she turned to face the head chef directly, ignoring the other's polite welcome. "Head chef!" she called out, her tone cool and commanding. The head chef, a short man in his late 60s, stepped forward promptly. He had served the family for decades, even before Jacob was born, and was the longest-serving member of the household staff. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, standing respectfully before her. Penelope looked him over carefully, her eyes scrutinizing his appearance before finally asking, "What's for breakfast?" The head chef offered a polite smile. "Fried eggs and bacon, ma'am, with freshly brewed coffee." Penelope raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Is that all?" she asked, her lips curving into a faint, smug smile. "Not at all, ma'am," the chef quickly responded. "It will be accompanied by a selection of fresh fruits." Penelope shot the head chef a look of irritation. "Are you done preparing breakfast?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Good, throw it all away. Breakfast will be scorched eggs, bacon, fried turkey, toast, and freshly squeezed orange juice." The head chef blinked, confused. "Huh? Ma'am? We've already prepared everything. We're about to set the table. You heard me, didn't you?" she snapped. "But ma'am, how can we just toss everything away now?" His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to maintain composure. Penelope smiled coldly and began to walk closer to him. The other chefs, sensing the tension, instinctively stepped back. They seemed to know what was coming next. Yet, the head chef stood his ground, unflinching as Penelope approached, his eyes fixed on her. She stopped just inches away from him, their faces almost level, the air thick with tension. He didn't move a muscle, meeting her gaze with steady defiance, as if daring her to come closer. For a long moment, they stood in silence, face to face, locked in a silent battle of wills. Penelope, unfazed, smirked slightly in anger. "You know I've always hated your guts, right?" Penelope began, her voice dripping with venom. "The only reason you're still here is that my husband still finds you useful. Otherwise, you'd have been out of this house long ago." Her words were sharp, each one intended to wound. The head chef stood silent, his gaze steady, refusing to be baited. He knew better than to respond, understanding that silence was his safest defense. Penelope's anger grew with each passing second of his quiet defiance. The calmness in his demeanor only fueled her fury. She wanted him to fear her, to cower, but he remained unshaken, which infuriated her even more. Suddenly, with a cold smile, Penelope reached up and pulled the chef's cap from his head. For a brief moment their eyes locked, hers filled with rage, his with quiet resolve. Before he had time to react, she swung the cap at him, hitting him repeatedly across the head. The first strike caused a collective gasp from the staff, who stood frozen, shocked by what had just unfolded right before them. "How many times have I told you?" Penelope spat between blows. "When I give you an instruction, you carry it out without asking stupid questions?" The head chef winced but remained composed, keeping his head down as she continued to strike him with his own cap. "When I say jump ! You jump, and if I tell you to lie on the floor, you do that. And if I tell you to throw away the stupid breakfast, you do that without asking me stupid, irrelevant questions," she shouted. Then before he could blink an eye, she landed a heavy slap across his cheeks. "Yes, ma'am," he muttered, holding his cheek, his voice low and resigned. Penelope's hand finally stopped mid-swing. She tossed the cap aside with a look of disgust, stepping back to survey the room. The other chef stood motionless, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief, but none dared to intervene. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, old man," Penelope sneered, her voice cutting through the kitchen. "Just know your days in this house are numbered. I don't understand what Jacob sees in you. You're nothing but a smelly, dirty old man who doesn't know his place." She stepped closer, flipping the chef's cap toward his face. "Now get busy making breakfast or you won't like what I do next." Penelope glared at him, then turned her sharp gaze toward the rest of the kitchen staff. "I want breakfast ready in 1 hour. Get to work," she barked. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," she said icily, her gaze sweeping across the room. "When I give an order, it's to be followed without question," she said and headed outside, banging the door after her. As soon as she left, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. The head chef, still composed, placed his cap back on his head, taking a deep breath. Then, as if Penelope's outburst had no effect on him, he turned to the other chefs. "You heard her?" he said, his face breaking into a broad smile. "Come on, let's get to work." The other chefs, relieved by his calm demeanor, nodded and quickly returned to their tasks, the kitchen once again buzzing with activity. After storming out of the kitchen, Penelope headed outside for a walk, craving fresh air to calm her nerves. Her altercation with the head chef had left her feeling agitated, and she needed a moment to collect herself. She had always despised the head chef, despite all her efforts to convince Jacob to send him away. But Jacob had stubbornly refused, reminding her that Grace, his late wife, had personally hired the chef. Penelope hadn't bothered to argue further when Jacob explained his reasons, though the bitterness lingered. He wouldn't even allow her to make changes to the kitchen, let alone fire the chef. The thought of Grace's initials etched into nearly every corner of that room infuriated her, a constant reminder of her presence even in death. This was why she rarely set foot in the kitchen. It wasn't just the head chef she couldn't stand, it was the entire space, haunted by Grace's lingering influence. Today, however, she'd gone in to make sure everything was done exactly how she wanted, but even that had turned into an unpleasant encounter. Penelope walked straight to the garden, her favorite place in the mansion. The wide array of flowers always seemed to lift her spirits, their fresh scent offering some sense of peace amidst the chaos of the house. She bent down to admire a rose, absent-mindedly running her fingers along its petals. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her hand. "Ouch!" she yelped, quickly bringing her finger to her mouth. The thorn had pricked her skin, and she sucked on the small wound, cursing her carelessness. As she tended to her finger, she heard the sound of the gate swinging open. Curious, she looked up to see who had arrived. The moment her eyes landed on the approaching car, her mood soured instantly. It was Briston. Penelope let out a frustrated sigh, her irritation mounting. This was the worst possible time for Briston to show up. Jacob was still fuming over the disaster he had caused at the last family dinner, and she had been planning to pacify him before things escalated further. But now, with Briston's untimely arrival, she knew that any chance of a peaceful morning was out of the question. Of all days, she muttered under her breath as she stood up, brushing off her dress. As the car pulled into the driveway, she needed to stop him from seeing Jacob. In fact, she needed to stop him from entering the mansion, else all hell was about to break loose in the mansion. Briston, having packed the car to a corner, got down from it smiling happily. He was still in a joyous mood after meeting with Yvonne. He was happy she was no longer angry with him. He wanted to share the news with his mother. That was why he rushed home that morning, at least to prove to them that he was not capable of doing anything. He saw Penelope walking towards him, a smile escaped from his lips. He walked quickly to meet up with her. "Mom, I have good news," he shouted. Before he could take his final step closer to her, Penelope raised her hands and landed a thunderous slap on his cheeks that sent him sprawling on the ground. Briston stumbled to the floor, holding his cheek in shock. "Mom, what was that for?" he cried out, confused and hurt by the sudden slap. He was walking towards her to give her a hug, but the slap had caught him completely off guard. "What was the meaning of that stunt you pulled during the family dinner?" Penelope's voice was seething with fury, her eyes burning with anger. Briston stood up slowly, dusting himself off. He looked at her, a mixture of frustration and disbelief flashing across his face. "Is this how you greet your son after not seeing him for a while, Day?" "That doesn't answer my question," Penelope snapped, cutting him off. "What was the meaning of that?" Briston sighed, rubbing his cheek. "Well, Mom, that's actually why I'm here, to share the good news. I've rectified everything." Penelope's expression shifted, confusion flickering behind her anger. "Good news? What are you talking about? What have you rectified?" she asked, her voice filled with suspicion. Briston smiled, clearing his throat as if preparing for a grand announcement. "It's Yvonne. She agreed to the date I chose. We're still getting married," he said, a broad grin spreading across his face. Penelope's face fell with disappointment. "What?" she shouted, her voice rising in disbelief. For a brief moment, she had thought Briston might share something truly meaningful, something that showed that he was sorry for what he had done. But as usual, he had fallen short of her expectations. "What do you mean the wedding is still happening?" she demanded, her fury rising again. "Yes, Mom. Isn't it good news?" Briston replied, still smiling, oblivious to her outrage. Penelope stared at him, fists clenched at her sides as she restrained herself from delivering another slap. "What the hell is wrong with you, Briston?" she yelled. "I was hoping you had come to your senses, but instead you've thrown all my expectations into the mud." Briston's smile faltered, and he looked at her, puzzled. "Mom, what do you mean by that? How many times do I have to tell you that Yvonne is not welcome in this house?" Her voice was now trembling with a mix of frustration and desperation. "Well, Mom, I've heard it 1,000 times and it's nothing new, but frankly, your opinion doesn't matter in this situation. What matters is that I love her, she loves me, and she's agreed to marry me," Briston said defiantly. Penelope shook her head, her disbelief deepening. "You know, I'm not even surprised by your foolishness anymore. But are you also blind? The girl slapped you in front of everyone. She humiliated you. Do you need a fortune teller to make you see that she doesn't love you?" Briston's smile returned, more determined this time. "Mom, I knew you'd say something like that, but I've got it all covered. The reason she slapped me was because she was overwhelmed. I took her by surprise." Her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand, utterly speechless. For a moment, she wondered if her son was under some kind of spell. How could he be this blind? How could he twist such a public humiliation into something as absurd as being overwhelmed? She could hardly believe the words coming out of his mouth. "You're a fool," she finally muttered under her breath, shaking her head in disbelief. A complete fool. Briston, still convinced he was right, stood there beaming, unaware of how far his mother's respect for him had fallen. Penelope knew now that reasoning with him was futile. He was going to learn the hard way. She breathed in and out, trying to calm herself as she approached Briston. Gently, she cupped his chin in her hand and spoke in a soft, controlled tone. "Listen to me, Briston. I'm a woman, and I know how women think. No woman slaps her fiancé over a simple wedding date. Who wouldn't want to get married? Yvonne doesn't love you. She's not good for you, and you need to abort whatever plans you've made with her." For a moment, she hoped that her softer approach might get through to him, that he might finally see reason. But Briston shook his head. "That's where you've got it all wrong, Mom. You don't understand." Before he could finish his sentence, she pulled her hand back and slapped him again, even harder than before. "Mom, what was that for?" Briston cried, clutching his cheek in disbelief. "Maybe this will knock some sense into that thick skull of yours," she snapped, her patience completely gone. You and Dad had better accept this because Yvonne and I are getting married, whether you give your blessing or not. That will be over my dead body, Penelope yelled. Can't you see how horrible and disrespectful she is? She doesn't even have an ounce of respect for me, your own mother. Briston, still clutching his cheek, looked at her with frustration. Mum, you don't know her like I do. I promise you, Yvonne isn't like that. She was overwhelmed, that's all. Penelope shook her head in disbelief, unable to fathom how deeply her son was in denial. Listen to me, and listen well, she said, her voice now low and deadly serious. I am your mother, and I will not stand by and watch you make the biggest mistake of your life. You are not marrying Yvonne, and that is final. Briston laughed, his face filled with defiance. Well, Mum, my mind is made up, he said, turning to walk past her. But before he could take another step, Penelope grabbed him by the shirt, stopping him in his tracks. And where do you think you're going? She demanded. Inside, of course, Briston replied, his tone casual, as if nothing had just happened. You're not going anywhere near this house, Penelope snapped. Your father is still furious with you. You'd better take yourself right back to wherever you came from. Briston turned to face her, his expression hardening. Why should I? Why should I be scared of him? Mum, I'm tired and I'm hungry. I need to rest. You can rest anywhere but here, Penelope shot back. I've spent all morning preparing his favorite breakfast to pacify him, and I don't need you ruining the mood. Just the sight of you might send him into a rage. Briston's face twisted into a stubborn smile. Well, Mum, that's not my problem. I also plan on breaking the news of my wedding to him today. Without waiting for a response, he turned and headed toward the house. Penelope, still gripping his shirt, felt her control slipping away. Watching her son, who seemed more determined than ever to defy her, she knew the worst was yet to come. Her heart pounded as she envisioned the explosive confrontation that would erupt between father and son once he stepped inside. Briston! Briston! Penelope called out, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. He continued walking, ignoring her completely, until he disappeared inside the house. She stood there, her heart beating, praying silently that he couldn't run into Jacob. And if they did meet, she hoped desperately that Briston wouldn't bring up the wedding to Yvonne. She knew that any mention of it would cause huge problems, and she feared the worst. The tension in the air felt thick, and she braced herself, knowing all hell would break loose if things went wrong. Nara opened her eyes slowly, blinking sleepily. As her vision cleared, she found herself face to face with Gordon. At first she thought she might still be dreaming, but no, he was really there, lying beside her with his face just inches from hers. His arm was draped protectively over her, as if to shield her from the world. She could feel the warmth of his breath gently brushing against her face. He slept so peacefully like a baby. Her gaze traced his features, his eyes, his nose, his mouth. Everything about him seemed perfect at that moment. She wondered what he was dreaming about as his chest rose and fell with his deep, steady breaths. Gordon shifted slightly in his sleep, and a strand of his hair fell across his face. Nara smiled to herself and reached out to adjust it. Her fingers brushed his skin, feeling its warmth and softness, and for a second, she hesitated, not wanting to wake him. After fixing his hair, she pulled her hand back and continued admiring his peaceful face. But just then, Gordon's eyes fluttered open and their gazes met. Nara froze, too surprised to speak. Her mind raced, unsure of what to say. He looked at her and smiled softly. Good morning, he said, his voice still gentle from sleep. Good morning, Nara replied, trying to sound casual though her heart was racing. She didn't move, staying in the same position as if any sudden movement might break the delicate moment between them. Did you just wake up? Gordon asked, his eyes still half closed, as though he was fighting off the remnants of sleep. Nara hesitated for a second. Should she admit that she'd been awake for a while, staring at him? That might be a bit awkward, she thought. Yes, just now. I'm just waking up, she lied, trying to sound convincing. Gordon smiled at her warmly. You still look the same. Nara furrowed her brow, confused. What do you mean, the same? She asked, although she had a feeling she knew exactly what he meant. You know how some people look completely different when they wake up from sleep? But you don't. You look the same. Nara grinned, a playful sparkle in her eyes. And what's the same? She asked, prompting him. Beautiful, of course, Gordon said softly, his smile widening. Nara couldn't help it. Her face broke into a broad smile, and she felt herself blushing. Well, I can't say the same about you, she teased, trying to hide her embarrassment behind a joke. Gordon raised an eyebrow, amused. Oh, and why's that? Because your face is all scrunched up and your eyes are puffy, she said with a laugh. Gordon laughed heartily, shaking his head. Silly girl, he said affectionately, his eyes sparkling with amusement. Nara laughed softly, and as the laughter faded, an easy silence settled between them. They stood in the same position, lying close, their faces only inch apart. Neither moved nor spoke for a while, just gazing at each other, content in the quiet moment. How did the meeting go? Nara asked, breaking the silence. Gordon blinked in surprise. What meeting? The one with your father? Nara reminded him. You said you were supposed to meet him yesterday. Oh, that meeting. Gordon's expression changed as he remembered. Dad called and canceled it. He mentioned something about rescheduling for today. Oh, I see, Nara said, nodding. Do you know why he wanted to meet you? I have a feeling it's something to do with Briston. Gordon replied with a sigh. I thought as much, Nara said quietly. Gordon's eyes shifted to her foot. How's your ankle? He asked, his voice full of concern. Nara wiggled her foot back and forth. It's much better now, the pain's not as bad as yesterday. I think I can even walk on my own. Are you sure? Gordon asked, still worried. Yes, of course, look, I can move it without pain. She moved her foot again to show him. Gordon smiled. Seems like the painkillers and ointment did the trick? Yes, they really helped, Nara agreed, smiling back at him. Another comfortable silence followed, but this time something was different. The air between them seemed to shift. Their breaths mingled in the quiet, and suddenly Gordon felt an overwhelming urge to kiss her. He leaned in, closing the small distance between them. Nara, sensing his intention, closed her eyes, her heart racing. Just as their lips were about to touch, the door suddenly flew open, startling them both. They jolted apart, their moment interrupted. I hope I'm not disrupting anything, Nurse Anna said with a smile as she quietly shut the door behind her. Nara immediately sat up straighter, attempting to maintain a composed expression. However, the embarrassment that flushed her face was difficult to hide. Gordon stood up as well, his tone polite. Good morning, Nurse Anna. Anna smiled back warmly. Good morning. I hope you both enjoyed your stay at the hospital. Oh yes, we did, Nara quickly responded, though her voice cracked slightly. She was still a bit flustered by Anna's sudden entrance. What brings you here so early? Where's Dr. Louis? Gordon asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Dr. Louis had an important operation this morning. He won't be out for another 3 hours, so he sent me to discharge Nara, Anna replied, walking closer to the bed. She glanced at her ankle and asked gently, How's the ankle? Does it still hurt? Nara moved her foot slightly, testing its mobility. It doesn't hurt as much as it did yesterday. Good. Anna smiled approvingly. That means you're ready to be discharged today. At the mention of being discharged, Nara let out a sigh of relief. She was tired of the strong smell of hospital disinfectants and the sterile environment. For a moment, she had considered asking to leave earlier, but Gordon's comforting presence had made her stay more bearable. Are you sure it's okay for her to leave? Gordon asked, his concern evident in his voice. Oh yes, Anna reassured him. As long as she can move the ankle, she's good to go. That's wonderful news, Nara said with a smile, eager to finally leave. Great, I'll go print out your discharge papers, Anna said, her tone brisk and efficient. When you're ready, just come downstairs and you can sign the paperwork. We'll be down shortly, Gordon confirmed. Anna turned to leave, but then paused mid-step. She looked back at Nara with a mischievous smile playing on her lips. One more thing, she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of excitement. Nara blinked in confusion. Is there a problem? She asked, unsure of what she was getting at. Anna hesitated for a moment, then spoke with a mix of nervousness and excitement. I hope this doesn't come across as unprofessional, but could I get your autograph, please? Her request was sincere, her eyes wide with anticipation. It took a moment for Nara to process the request. Nara smiled warmly, her initial embarrassment fading away. Of course, she said graciously. I'd be happy to. Anna beamed, visibly thrilled. "Thank you so much," she exclaimed, her excitement barely contained. Nara looked at Anna, both confused and surprised. No one had ever asked for her autograph before. In fact, she didn't even have one. The realization hit her that she was about to give her very first autograph. Speechless, she stared at Anna, her mind racing. Anna noticed Nara's hesitation and immediately backtracked. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to overwhelm you. It's fine, you don't have to do it," she said, her voice apologetic. "Oh no. Don't worry," Nara replied, trying to smile to reassure her. "I'm not offended at all. I'm just surprised." Anna let out a relieved sigh and smiled again. "Where would you like to sign?" She dipped her hand into her pocket and pulled out a pen and a small keychain. The keychain was made of sturdy material, with enough surface area for something to be written or scribed on. "Here," she said, handing it over to Nara. Nara stared at the keychain, surprised. It was a bright pink color, adorned with cute pictures of unicorns and stars. She glanced from the keychain to Anna, unsure of what to say. Anna noticed the confusion on Nara's face and quickly spoke up. "I know it looks a bit childish, right?" she asked, a little embarrassed. "Oh no. It's one of a kind," Nara said quickly, trying not to offend her. She took the pen from Anna, holding the keychain in her other hand, but as she brought the pen closer to the keychain, she froze. She had never written an autograph before and had no idea how to go about it. A moment of panic set in. She didn't want to make a fool of herself. After a few seconds of thinking, she decided to play it safe and use her signature. She scribbled her name carefully onto the keychain, hoping it looked all right. "Here," she said, handing it back to Anna. Anna's face lit up with excitement. "Thank you so much," she exclaimed, practically glowing with happiness. "I've been a huge fan of yours ever since I saw you at that runway show. Meeting you here feels like a dream come true. I'm so grateful." Nara smiled, nodding as she listened. A warm sense of fulfillment bloomed in her chest. She had never considered herself someone who would have fans, but it was heartwarming to know she was recognized and appreciated. Anna, still beaming, tucked the keychain away carefully. "I'll be on my way now to get your discharge papers ready," she said, turning on her heels and walking out of the room. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving a quiet hum of excitement in the air. Gordon, who had been leaning against the corner of the room, watching everything unfold with an amused expression, cleared his throat. "I didn't know you had a fan," he said teasingly. Nara glanced at him, still a little stunned. "I'm as shocked as you are," she replied, shaking her head with a small laugh. Gordon walked over, grinning. "So, when do I get my own autograph?" he asked, clearly enjoying the moment. Nara rolled her eyes playfully, feeling a little more at ease. "Oh, you? You'll have to earn it," she teased back. "Challenge accepted," he said with a smirk, making Nara laugh. It was a light moment. Speaking of autographs, "I don't even have one," Nara admitted, a sheepish smile on her face. Gordon looked at her, puzzled. "Then what did you sign on the keychain?" "Well, I just used my signature, but that still counts as an autograph, right?" she asked, grinning. Gordon burst into laughter. "You definitely need to come up with a proper autograph for yourself. You never know when it'll come in handy," he said, shaking his head as he sat down beside her. Nara chuckled and nodded. "Yeah, you're probably right." After a moment, Gordon sighed. "I think we need to freshen up and head downstairs so we can get you discharged." Nara sighed dramatically and flopped back onto the bed, pulling the blanket over her face. "I don't have the energy to bathe." "I'll wait until I get home," she said, her voice muffled beneath the blanket. "Really?" Gordon asked, surprised. Nara peeked out from under the blanket, sitting up with a more insistent tone. "Yes, of course," she declared, now sulking a little. Gordon couldn't help but smile. She looked adorable when she pouted like that. Suddenly an idea flashed through his mind, and a mischievous glint appeared in his eyes. "Well, at least wash your face," he said casually. "You've got a little saliva mark at the corner of your mouth." Nara's eyes went wide with surprise. She immediately touched the corner of her mouth, her fingers moving quickly. "That's a lie! I don't salivate when I sleep!" she cried, her face turning red with embarrassment. Gordon stood up, laughing harder. He loved seeing the look on her face when she realized he was just teasing her. "You mischievous being," Nara exclaimed, realizing Gordon was only trying to mess with her. She threw off the blanket, her playful frustration clear. Gordon, seeing the fire in her eyes, quickly backed away, still laughing. "You're not going to catch me," he teased, darting toward the bathroom. "Wait till I get you?" Nara shouted, standing up more determinedly. Her ankle was healing well, and though she still limped a little, she could walk much better now. Gordon barely made it into the bathroom before Nara, still laughing, followed after him with a playful limp. "You're not getting away that easily," she called, chasing him as best she could. The sound of their laughter echoed throughout the room, filling the space with warmth and lightness. For a moment it felt like they had escaped the stress of the past few days and were just enjoying each other's company. Gordon peeked out from the bathroom, his grin wide as Nara tried to corner him. "You're too slow," he teased, ducking back inside just before she could catch him. Nara laughed, standing outside the door, her heart light and her spirits lifted. "Just wait, you'll regret this," she called through the door, smiling from ear to ear. She limped back to bed and sat down smiling. She touched the corner of her lips again and shook her head. How stupid of her to think that she could even salivate at the corner of her mouth. Penelope had just finished supervising the organizing of the dining table. The breakfast table was adorned with various dishes, all Jacob's favorites, carefully prepared in the hope that today might be different. She stepped back to admire her work, then let out a deep sigh. After a moment, she made her way to go fetch Jacob when suddenly she heard the clacking of shoes ascending the staircase. She paused, trying to listen more closely to determine if it was him or Briston. As the familiar scent of Jacob's cologne reached her, she knew it was him. She hurried to the base of the staircase and watched him descend, her heart beating faster. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "Good morning, honey," she greeted him softly, hoping for a kind response, or any response at all. Jacob glanced at her, his eyes traveling from her head to her toes, but he didn't say a word. He simply turned and started walking away, ignoring her completely. "Jacob?" Penelope called after him, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned around, abruptly, irritation clear in his expression. "What is it?" he asked sharply. Penelope swallowed hard. She could feel the tension building between them. "Breakfast is ready. Please have something to eat before you leave for work," she offered, trying to keep her voice steady. Jacob's gaze hardened. "You can eat it all yourself, I'm not hungry," he snapped. Penelope felt a sting in her chest but tried again. "Look, I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you the other night. It wasn't intentional, I promise," she said, her voice laced with desperation. "Penelope, enjoy the breakfast." "I'm not hungry," Jacob repeated, this time more resolute, turning his back to her once more. Just as he was about to leave, he paused, his eyes narrowing as they focused on someone coming down the stairs. It was Briston. The sight of him immediately caused Jacob's face to twist in anger. Briston was the last person he wanted to see at that moment. "Dad, you're awake finally," Briston called cheerfully, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Well, you're just in time. I have some good news to share," he added, his voice full of excitement. Penelope's heart sank. This was the worst possible time for Briston to bring up anything, let alone whatever good news he was about to share. She had a terrible feeling this was not going to end well. She tried to catch Briston's eye, hoping to warn him to hold off, but it was too late. The moment was slipping away, and she knew that nothing she could say or do would stop what was coming next. Jacob's jaw clenched tightly, his hands balled into fists. Penelope could only stand there helpless as the room filled with an air of impending disaster. She wanted to intervene, but all she could do now was watch the situation unfold, powerless to prevent the inevitable clash. "What is he doing here? What is this brat doing in my house?" Jacob shouted, his voice booming through the room. Penelope was shaken with fear. She instinctively walked closer to Briston, grabbing his hand in a desperate attempt to stop him from escalating the situation. But Briston was relentless. He brushed her hand away and faced his father squarely, refusing to back down. Jacob sighed in frustration, glancing briefly at Penelope before turning his gaze back to Briston. His expression hardened. "By the time I get back, I don't want to see him in my house," he ordered coldly, directing his command at her before turning to leave. "Hold on, Dad," Briston called after him, ignoring his father's dismissal. "As much as I know you're angry with me, you don't have to be anymore," I came bearing good news. Jacob stopped in his tracks, turning around slowly to face him. His patience was wearing thin. What good news are you talking about? He asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Well, Dad, it's nothing of great importance. Penelope cut in, her voice hurried as she tugged at Briston's shirt, silently pleading for him to keep quiet. But Briston, determined and oblivious to the tension in the room, walked closer to his father with a smile. Dad, I know you're disappointed in me. I know you think I can't take responsibility for anything, but just listen to this. Once I tell you, everything will change. Jacob's expression darkened. What the hell are you trying to say? Speak quickly and stop wasting my time, he snapped, his patience gone. Briston's smile widened, completely ignoring the hostility in his father's tone. Yvonne has agreed to the wedding date. We'll still be getting married by the end of the month. Isn't that great news? Jacob looked at him, his face filled with irritation rather than surprise. He was not surprised because he was already expecting something like this from him, but he was deeply disappointed. Disappointed that even now Briston didn't understand why he was so against him marrying Yvonne. Shaking his head in dismay, Jacob turned to Penelope. By the time I get back, make sure he's out of here, he said firmly, his tone final. Without waiting for a response, he walked out, followed by 2 of his bodyguards who had been silently standing by, waiting for his command. As the door slammed shut, Briston scoffed, turning to his mother. What's wrong with him? He muttered dismissively. Penelope, overwhelmed with frustration, placed her head in her hands and shook it slowly. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were filled with disappointment. Do you know that you're a complete disappointment? She said, her voice shaking with emotion. Briston rolled his eyes, clearly unfazed. He had heard these words from her before, and it was obvious he was already tuning her out. Gosh, Mom, not again. Not with your lectures.